Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. Today we'll examine chapter 5. Again, this chapter opens with a father imparting wisdom to his sons, which of course represents our Father imparting his wisdom to his children, you and me. The topic today is wisdom. Will cover sex education. Let's begin, starting with verse 1, chapter 5. My son, pay attention to my wisdom. Turn your ear to my words of insight. Then he explains why in verse 2. That you may maintain discretion, meaning to make wise decisions, and your lips may preserve, meaning they may guard and maintain what? Knowledge, meaning God's wisdom. Here we have the Father encouraging all of us to turn our ear, which means to listen intently, sincerely. Why? To gain and maintain wisdom. Throughout this chapter, the author will outline two life choices regarding our sexual behavior. Either we choose to listen and submit to God's wisdom of love, or we choose to listen and submit to the, quote, wisdom of lust, which in the next verse will be called an adulterous woman or an adulterous man. When the author speaks of adultery, he's referring to the seventh commandment, which has its root, the root word of adultery means to defile or to pollute. Adultery is the act of being unfaithful to your spouse, defiling that relationship, polluting that relationship. Promiscuous lifestyle, even for a single, is being unfaithful to whom? To your future spouse. Also, and equally importantly, adultery is being unfaithful to God, unfaithful to his wisdom. We are choosing lust over love. The author will explain that this choice of lust over love comes at a very, very high cost. For the lips of the adulterous woman or man drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, that choice, that path, is bitter as gall, which means wormwood, sharp as a double-edged sword. Jesus explained that adultery, this word adultery, is more than just sex outside of marriage only. Let's take a look at how he defined adultery. Jesus raised the bar and said that adultery is including entertaining lust in our hearts. That is also committing adultery. That too is a betrayal. It is being unfaithful. Lust, like all sin, begins with a thought. We are to capture those thoughts and confess those thoughts to God. And then repent. Repent means to turn, walk away from those thoughts. God's wisdom was never meant to be restrictive or rob us of physical pleasure. It was meant to actually enhance and protect those pleasures within the intimacy of marriage and to guard us from the pain that adultery always brings. As stated here, it brings bitterness and pain. This notion of free love may at first appear exciting and quote, free, but it is not free. It comes at a high cost, which will be listed in the next several verses. These include physical, mental, and spiritual health, harming our physical, mental, spiritual health, as well as financial loss and cost, loss of honor, loss of trust, loss of dignity, loss of reputation. And of course, it causes tremendous harm to those that we're closest to. And this path leads to the loss of fellowship and protection and guidance from God. So the Father warns, her feet, this path of lust, go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her path wanders aimlessly, but she does not know it. This path of lust is a path of darkness. We are abandoning God's light, his wisdom, and we end up aimlessly wandering and experience the pain and emptiness of stumbling in that darkness. The Father continues, Now then, my sons, Listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far, far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you lose your honor to others and your dignity to the one who is cruel, lest strangers feast on your wealth and your toil enrich the house of another. Keep to a path far from her means do not begin to entertain an exposure to any of those temptations. The best defense against adultery is distance. Too often we think we have the willpower. We can go right up to the edge. And as long as we don't cross it, we're good and safe. That's bad advice and bad theology. We tend to rationalize. Well, it's just a friendly chat. It's only a lunch, a drink after work. What's the harm? Do not go near there, family, lest it ends in headache and heartache. The Father continues to warn, if you take that dark path, he says, at the end of your life you will groan. When your flesh and body are spent, you will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or turn my ear to my instructors. And I was soon in serious trouble in the assembly of God's people. The stress, the guilt, the hopelessness of living a lonely, promiscuous life will take a heavy toll, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. So what is the healthy alternative? What's the healthy choice? He tells us beginning in verse 15, drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Then he asks a negative rhetorical question. Should your spring overflow in the streets? Meaning it shouldn't. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your stream of water in the public squares? The message here is we should only have intimacy with the spouse that God ordained for us. To drink here means to satisfy a thirst, both a physical pleasure thirst as well as a desire for intimacy, sharing a unique mutual bond of support and trust that is never to be shared with anyone else. This beautiful intimacy is poetically described in the next 3 verses. Let's take a look. Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. May you ever, meaning forever, be intoxicated and raptured with her love. The key word here is intoxicated, which means the thought of this person causes us to stagger with joy and appreciation. We have this attitude of gratitude that this person is our partner. You choose not to make comparisons, to not take this person for granted. You choose to focus on the positives. This is godly love that lasts a lifetime. Next, the Father asks another rhetorical question. Why? Why, my son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wayward woman? For your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all your paths. The author is encouraging us to first reflect, to consider, to examine before we choose that path of darkness. What is our reasoning? What is our rationale? We think it is love, but we should look at it and understand it's lust. And it's a path that will break the heart of your spouse and break the heart of God, because he fully sees and knows the grim cost that will be explained in these final 2 verses. The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them. The cords, meaning the ropes, of their sins hold them fast. For lack of discipline, they will die, led astray by their own great folly. The author is warning that an unfailing characteristic of sin is it begins with this false promise of freedom, but it always ends in bondage. It says here, the cords that bind, the rope that binds. Promiscuity is addictive. Pornography is addictive. Living a lie is addictive. It's folly to think that we can control sin. Sin always controls us. Jesus said, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. We are a slave to whatever controls us. It is our life's choice to be controlled by lust or controlled by the love of God. That ends chapter 5. We will pick it up in chapter 6 next week. Until then, may God bless you and your family with both grace and his peace. Aloha.